Emma was more than a best friend to me. She was my sister in every way that mattered. From childhood sleepovers to standing beside each other as maid of honor at our weddings, our bond was one of unwavering loyalty. We laughed until we cried, shared secrets we'd take to the grave, and supported each other through every storm life threw our way. So, when she was diagnosed with cancer, there was no question in my mind that I would be by her side every step of the way. When Emma told me about her diagnosis, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath us. She was terrified but determined to fight, and I made it my mission to make sure she never faced it alone. Chemotherapy, doctor's appointments, late-night phone calls when the fear crept in, I was there. I took on the role of her primary caregiver without hesitation, organizing her schedule, holding her hand through treatments, and creating moments of joy whenever I could. Her children, just 6 and 9 at the time, were too young to fully grasp the weight of what was happening, though they knew their mom was very sick. I grew close to them during this time, helping with homework, organizing playdates, and being a steady presence while their world felt so unsteady. Emma often told me how grateful she was for the support, and I told her I was just doing what anyone who loved her would. But not everyone stepped up the way I had hoped. Mike, Emma's husband, seemed distant. I tried to give him grace, telling myself he was coping in his own way, but there was always a nagging feeling that something was amiss. It wasn't until much later that I discovered the truth about his betrayal, a truth that would come to haunt me long after Emma was gone. For now, though, my focus was on Emma, my best friend, my sister in all but blood. Little did I know, the bonds of love and loyalty that had carried us this far were about to be tested in ways I could never have imagined. Emma and Mike had always seemed like the perfect couple to outsiders. They met in college, fell in love quickly, and built a life that appeared picture-perfect. A modest home in a quiet neighborhood, 2 beautiful kids, and a shared love for family traditions. But beneath the surface, their relationship was more complex than most people realized. Emma often confided in me about their struggles. Mike was ambitious, throwing himself into his career with a focus that sometimes left her feeling neglected. While Emma poured her energy into being a present and devoted mother, Mike's long hours at work and occasional detached demeanor created distance between them. Emma chalked it up to the natural ebb and flow of marriage, but I could tell it weighed on her more than she let on. When the cancer diagnosis came, I hoped it might bring them closer together. I imagined Mike stepping up, becoming the rock she needed during the hardest fight of her life. At first, it seemed he might. He attended a few appointments and made efforts to adjust his schedule, but his attention quickly waned. As Emma's illness progressed, his absence became glaring. Emma rarely complained outright, but her silence spoke volumes. She wanted to shield the kids from any tension and focus her energy on fighting for her life. I found myself stepping into the gaps Mike left, taking on roles that felt beyond what a friend should be responsible for. Looking back, I wonder how much of Mike's behavior I dismissed because I didn't want to add to Emma's burdens. She deserved better, but like so many things in their marriage, she accepted it with quiet resignation. It wasn't until later that I would learn the full extent of what she had endured in silence. The day Emma told me she had cancer is burned into my memory with painful clarity. She called me late in the evening, her voice trembling as she struggled to get the words out. "It's stage 3, she said, barely above a whisper. I remember sitting there, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, trying to find something, anything reassuring to say. But what do you say to your best friend when the unthinkable becomes her reality? From that moment on, our lives shifted. Emma, ever practical and composed, went straight into planning mode. She wanted a second opinion, treatment options, and a strategy to keep her kids' lives as normal as possible. Beneath her determination, though, I could sense the fear she was trying so hard to hide. I promised her I'd be there for whatever she needed, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of appointments, tests, and difficult conversations. Emma and Mike sat down with the kids to explain, in the gentlest terms, that Mommy was sick and would need a lot of help to get better. The kids asked innocent, heartbreaking questions, their small faces etched with confusion. It was clear they didn't fully understand, and in a way, that felt like a blessing. For Emma, there was no time to dwell on what-ifs. She dove headfirst into treatment, enduring the grueling cycle of chemotherapy and its harsh side effects. I became her constant companion, driving her to appointments, sitting by her side as the IV dripped steadily into her veins, and helping her navigate the emotional toll of it all. In those early days, we clung to hope, even as the reality of her diagnosis began to sink in. It was a fight we were determined to face together, no matter how daunting the road ahead seemed. It was during one of Emma's chemo treatments that I first noticed something strange about Mike. He had missed yet another appointment, claiming he had work obligations. Emma brushed it off, saying he was under a lot of stress and trying to keep everything afloat. I wanted to believe her, but something about his increasing absence didn't sit right with me. Mike's behavior became harder to ignore as the weeks went on. He seemed distracted, distant even when he was physically present. He spent more time on his phone, excusing himself to take calls or respond to messages with an urgency that felt out of place. It wasn't until I accidentally overheard part of a hushed conversation that my suspicions solidified. The moment of confirmation came on an ordinary weekday when I stopped by their house unexpectedly to drop off groceries. Mike wasn't expecting me, and as I entered, I saw him quickly end a video call. The look on his face, guilt, panic, was all the confirmation I needed. Still, I held my tongue, unsure of how to approach something so devastating. Emma, however, wasn't unaware. One evening, when she seemed unusually quiet, I asked her what was wrong. That's when she told me she knew Mike was having an affair. "It's with someone from his office," she said matter-of-factly, her voice tinged with exhaustion rather than anger. She had found messages on his phone but decided not to confront him. "I don't have the energy for it," she admitted. "I just want to focus on the kids and getting through this." I felt a mix of rage and helplessness. Emma deserved unwavering support, not betrayal. But she had made her choice, and I respected her wish not to bring it up. At the same time, my view of Mike began to shift irreparably. He wasn't just neglectful, he was breaking vows to a woman who was fighting for her life, and that betrayal would stay with me long after Emma's fight was over. Emma's decision to stay silent about Mike's affair baffled me at first. She wasn't someone who avoided confrontation. In fact, she was one of the most straightforward people I knew. If someone crossed a line, she didn't hesitate to call them out. But this wasn't just someone. It was Mike, her husband, the father of her children, the man who should have been her anchor during the storm. When she told me she had known for months about his infidelity, I expected anger, bitterness, or at least sadness in her voice. Instead, there was a strange calm, almost resignation. "I just don't have the energy," she said again, a phrase that felt like a shield she used to protect herself from the weight of it all. Emma explained that she had thought about confronting him, about demanding answers or making ultimatums, but every time she considered it, the effort seemed overwhelming. "The chemo is already a full-time job," she said with a tired smile. "Adding Mike to the list feels impossible." Her focus, she insisted, needed to be on the kids. She wanted their lives to feel as normal as possible, even if hers was unraveling in the background. I wanted to argue with her, to tell her she deserved more, but I didn't. She was already carrying so much, and I knew that pushing her would only add to her burden. So instead, I listened. I stayed by her side, offering whatever support I could. Still, her silence weighed on me. It felt unfair, unjust, that she was the one forced to bear this knowledge alone. I wished I could take her pain away, but the only thing I could do was honor her decision. For Emma, peace, however fragile, was more important than justice, and I had to respect that. Becoming Emma's primary caregiver felt natural, like an extension of the friendship we had always shared. It wasn't something I planned or even thought about deeply. It was just what needed to be done. From the moment she was diagnosed, I stepped into the role without hesitation. My days were filled with tasks that quickly became routine: driving her to appointments, managing her medications, coordinating with doctors, and making sure she ate even when her appetite disappeared. On the harder days, when the chemo left her too weak to get out of bed, I would sit with her, holding her hand as she drifted in and out of restless sleep. But caregiving wasn't just about logistics. It was about being her anchor, the person she could lean on when everything felt like too much. Sometimes that meant distracting her with silly jokes or stories about our past adventures. Other times, it meant sitting in silence, letting her process her emotions without the pressure of having to talk. The hardest part wasn't the physical demands, though those were exhausting. It was watching someone I loved so deeply suffer. Seeing Emma, once so vibrant and full of life, struggle with the simplest things, getting dressed, walking across the room, broke my heart in ways I couldn't explain. Still, there were moments of lightness, even joy. We celebrated small victories, like a good scan result or a day where she felt strong enough to take a walk outside. Those moments reminded me why I was doing this, not out of obligation, but out of love. In the background, Mike's absence grew more apparent. The weight of caregiving often felt heavier because I knew I was filling a gap he should have been helping with. But I couldn't dwell on that. My focus was Emma, and ensuring she never felt alone in this fight. The day Emma passed away was a quiet one, which somehow felt fitting. She had been in hospice care for a few weeks by then, her body growing weaker as the cancer spread. I had been staying with her almost every night, refusing to leave her side for more than a few hours at a time. She deserved to be surrounded by love, not just in life, but in her final moments. That morning, the house was calm. Her children were at school, and Mike was at work. Another choice I didn't understand, though by then I had stopped trying to. Emma had been drifting in and out of sleep, her breathing shallow but steady. I sat beside her, holding her hand, softly talking about memories we had shared. The time we got lost on a road trip and ended up laughing until we cried. The silly pranks we used to pull on each other. The joy she felt on her wedding day. At one point, she opened her eyes and gave me a faint smile. "You've been my rock," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I wanted to say something profound, to tell her how much she had meant to me, but all I could manage was, "I love you." It was enough. When she finally slipped away, it was peaceful. Her breathing slowed, then stopped, and for a moment, the room felt unbearably still. I stayed with her for a long time, holding her hand, letting the reality of her absence sink in. The days that followed were a blur of grief and arrangements. The funeral was heartbreaking, a stark reminder of all that Emma had been and all that the world had lost. Her children clung to me, their confusion and sadness mirroring my own. Emma was gone, but her presence lingered everywhere, in her children's laughter, in the memories we had shared, and in the deep, unshakable bond she had left behind. The pain of losing her was immense, but so was the love that remained. In the weeks following Emma's funeral, I tried to focus on supporting her children. They were confused, heartbroken, and desperately trying to make sense of their new reality. I wanted to be a constant for them, someone they could lean on as they navigated the loss of their mother. But every time I saw Mike, a storm brewed inside me. I had stayed silent about his affair during Emma's illness out of respect for her wishes. She didn't want the confrontation, and I honored that. But now, with her gone, the weight of his betrayal felt unbearable. He had failed her in the moments she needed him most, and it was something I couldn't let go. The confrontation happened late one evening. I was dropping off a casserole, one of the many meals people had been bringing over, and I found him alone in the kitchen. The kids were upstairs, and the house was quiet. Something about his casual demeanor, as if he hadn't destroyed the trust Emma had placed in him, pushed me over the edge. "Did you love her?" I asked abruptly. He looked startled, his usual mask of composure slipping. "What kind of question is that?" He deflected. "The kind you should have an answer to," I snapped. "She knew about the affair, Mike. She knew, and she was too sick to do anything about it. Do you have any idea how much that broke her?" His face paled. He stammered something about how he had been overwhelmed, how he had made a mistake, but I wasn't interested in excuses. "You betrayed her when she needed you most," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You're a disgrace, Mike, and I hope you carry that with you for the rest of your life." He begged me not to tell the kids, swearing it would destroy them. I promised him I wouldn't. Emma's children didn't deserve to bear the weight of his failure. But from that moment on, I knew my relationship with Mike would never be the same. Emma's children, Lily and Ben, were just 6 and 9 when she passed away. They were too young to fully understand the enormity of their loss, yet old enough to feel the void their mother left behind. In the days following her death, they clung to the adults around them, seeking reassurance, comfort, and any semblance of normalcy in a world that had been turned upside down. I had always adored Lily and Ben. Emma had often joked that I was their bonus mom, and in many ways, that's how I saw myself. During her illness, I spent countless hours with them, helping with homework, organizing movie nights, and making sure they felt loved even when their mother was too weak to do those things herself. After the funeral, they naturally gravitated toward me. Ben, the younger of the two, often asked questions that made my heart ache. Is Mommy coming back after the angels fix her? Lily, older and more perceptive, would sit quietly, her sadness palpable but unspoken. I tried my best to be honest with them while keeping things age-appropriate, but it wasn't easy. Mike, to his credit, was trying. He was attentive to their needs, ensuring their routines stayed intact and making an effort to be present. But I couldn't shake the bitterness I felt toward him, and I worried it might seep into my interactions with the kids. They didn't deserve that. They had already lost so much. I became their safe space, someone they could turn to without fear of overwhelming or upsetting. Whether it was helping Lily navigate a school project or comforting Ben after a bad dream, I was there. And as much as I resented Mike, I couldn't bring myself to pull away from the children. They were Emma's legacy, and in them, I saw pieces of her that reminded me why I had to keep showing up. It wasn't long after Emma's death that I first heard about Mike's new girlfriend. The news came through a mutual acquaintance who mentioned, almost casually, that Mike had been seeing someone, a co-worker. I didn't need to ask to know it was the same woman he had been involved with during Emma's illness. The timing of it all was like a slap in the face. A few weeks later, I met her. Mike invited me over to discuss some logistical details about the kids, and she was there, sitting at the kitchen table as though she had always been a part of their lives. She introduced herself with a bright, almost overly cheerful smile, and for a moment, I was too stunned to respond. This was the woman Mike had chosen, the one who had played a role in betraying Emma, and now she was in Emma's home, around Emma's children. She was younger than I expected, polished and impossibly put together. Her Instagram influencer persona, complete with staged photos of dressed-up cats and whimsical AI-generated art, felt surreal when juxtaposed with the gravity of the situation. She radiated a curated kind of charm, but all I could see was the pain her presence represented. The children seemed hesitant around her, unsure of how to act. Lily, ever observant, watched her carefully, while Ben seemed more focused on the fact that she had brought cupcakes decorated with tiny edible flowers. The sight of her trying to ingratiate herself with them made my stomach turn. Mike, oblivious to my discomfort, acted as if everything was normal. He even made a passing comment about how the kids would get used to her soon enough. I left that evening feeling more conflicted than ever, torn between my love for the children and the overwhelming urge to distance myself from the chaos Mike had brought into their lives. The phone call came out of the blue, interrupting a quiet evening. Mike's name flashed on my screen, and for a brief moment, I considered not answering. But my concern for Lily and Ben overpowered my hesitation, and I picked up. His tone was unusually upbeat, almost casual, as if we were old friends catching up. After some initial pleasantries, he got to the point. "Listen, I wanted to ask you something," he began, his voice carefully measured. He explained that he and his girlfriend, he referred to her by name, though I didn't care to remember it, had been struggling to find time for themselves. Between work, the kids, and her growing influencer career, they were overwhelmed and needed a break to recharge. "I was hoping you could help," he said, his voice dropping into what he probably thought was a persuasive tone. "Emma always trusted you with the kids, and I know she'd want you to step in for them now." For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He wasn't asking for occasional help. He was asking me to become their regular babysitter so he and his girlfriend could enjoy their free time. The audacity of it left me speechless. I told him no, firmly but politely, though the anger simmered just beneath the surface. I love Lily and Ben, but I can't do this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike didn't take it well. He launched into a guilt-laden tirade about how the kids needed me, how Emma would have wanted me to help, and how I was being selfish by refusing. His manipulation was thinly veiled, but it stung nonetheless. I hung up feeling a mix of anger and sadness. Helping the kids was one thing. Supporting the life he had built on the ashes of Emma's was another entirely. After the phone call, I sat in silence, replaying the conversation in my mind. The sheer entitlement of Mike's request was staggering, but what hurt the most was the way he tried to use Emma's memory against me. The idea that she would have wanted me to support him and his new life felt like a twisting of everything Emma stood for. The truth was, saying no wasn't easy. I loved Lily and Ben deeply, and the thought of not being there for them when they needed support tugged at my heart. But I also knew that agreeing to Mike's request would mean crossing a line I couldn't come back from. It wasn't just about babysitting. It was about enabling a situation that betrayed Emma's trust and memory. I thought about everything Emma had endured in silence, the betrayal she bore quietly for the sake of her kids, and how she had relied on me as a source of stability. How could I now step into a role that felt like an endorsement of the life Mike had built with the very woman who contributed to her pain? Still, the decision weighed heavily on me. Family and friends had started weighing in, with some arguing that the kids' needs should come first. They didn't understand how deeply this situation cut. It wasn't about vindictiveness or pettiness. It was about respecting the boundaries Emma would have wanted. When Mike called again, I was prepared. "I can't do this, Mike," I said firmly. "I'll always be here for Lily and Ben in ways that feel right to me. But babysitting while you and your girlfriend get free time isn't one of them." His response was predictably angry, filled with accusations and guilt trips. But for the first time, I felt no doubt in my choice. I had to honor Emma's legacy, and this was my way of doing that. Mike's reaction to my refusal was as dramatic as I expected, if not more so. He didn't just let it go. He made it a campaign. Within days, I began hearing from mutual friends and even some of my own family members. The message was always the same. Mike was telling everyone that I had abandoned Emma's children, that I was punishing them because of my personal feelings toward him and his new relationship. The accusations hurt more than I cared to admit. These were people who knew how much I had done for Emma, who had seen me pour everything I had into supporting her and the kids during her illness. Now, they were questioning my motives, some even suggesting that I was being vindictive. Mike, of course, was relentless. He called several more times, each conversation a mix of guilt-tripping and outright hostility. "I don't understand how you can turn your back on them," he said during one particularly heated exchange. Emma would be so disappointed. That line, invoking Emma, cut deeper than anything else. It was the ultimate manipulation, and it nearly worked. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if I was making the wrong choice. Maybe I was letting my anger toward Mike overshadow my responsibility to the kids. But then I remembered Emma's wishes. She had chosen peace over confrontation, love over resentment, even when she knew the truth about Mike. She had trusted me to be her anchor, and I couldn't let that trust be used as a weapon against me now. I started drawing firmer boundaries. I told Mike that while I would always be there for Lily and Ben in meaningful ways, I wouldn't be his scapegoat. "You need to find another solution," I told him. He didn't take it well, of course, but for the first time I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't about abandoning anyone. It was about standing by the principles that Emma and I had shared, even if it meant standing alone. As if dealing with Mike's manipulative accusations wasn't enough, my own family started chiming in. It began subtly. Questions about how the kids were doing and whether I'd considered helping just for their sake. But soon, the comments became more pointed. My mother, always the peacemaker, urged me to reconsider. "They've been through so much already," she said. "Are you sure this is the right choice?" My siblings, too, weighed in, though their tone was less gentle. "You're punishing the kids for something that isn't their fault," my brother said bluntly during a family dinner. "If Emma trusted you to look after them, shouldn't you keep that promise?" Their words stung because they came from a place of genuine concern for the children. I knew Lily and Ben were innocent in all of this, and the thought of them feeling abandoned because of my decision was unbearable. But what my family didn't understand was the bigger picture, the betrayal I'd witnessed, the impossible position Mike had put me in, and the emotional toll it took to even consider stepping back into that house under the current circumstances. I tried to explain my reasoning, but it felt like shouting into the wind. To them, it seemed black and white. The kids needed support, and I had the ability to provide it. The nuance of the situation, the moral weight of enabling Mike's choices, was lost in their rush to fix things. The constant pressure was exhausting. It made me question myself, replaying every decision, every conversation, wondering if I was being too rigid. But then I would think about Emma, what she endured, the dignity she held onto despite everything, and it reminded me why I had made this choice. I wasn't abandoning Emma's children. I was refusing to betray her memory. And that distinction mattered, even if no one else understood it. The situation had become a moral minefield, and I found myself grappling with the endless arguments on both sides. On one hand, there was the undeniable fact that Lily and Ben were innocent in all of this. They didn't choose their father's actions or the circumstances they now found themselves in. Abandoning them felt wrong, like I was failing not only them but Emma, who had trusted me to love and protect them. But on the other hand, there was the principle of the matter. Mike's actions had shattered the trust Emma placed in him, and he had made choices that were deeply disrespectful to her memory. Agreeing to his request felt like an endorsement of the life he had built with the woman who had contributed to Emma's pain. Could I truly honor Emma by pretending that betrayal didn't matter? Friends and family voiced their opinions freely, often without knowing the full context. Some told me that love for the children should outweigh my anger at Mike, while others said I was fully justified in setting boundaries. Social media didn't help either. Casual acquaintances weighed in with their unsolicited advice, turning what felt like an intensely personal dilemma into public fodder. In quiet moments, I would sit with my thoughts, weighing my love for the children against my deep resentment toward Mike. Every time I leaned toward giving in, the image of Emma lying in that hospice bed, holding on to her dignity despite everything, would surface. She had chosen to protect her children from drama and bitterness, prioritizing their well-being over her own heartbreak. Could I do any less? Ultimately, I began to see the situation not as a simple choice between right and wrong, but as a matter of integrity. I loved Lily and Ben, and I would always be there for them in ways that felt true to my values. But I couldn't compromise myself, or Emma's memory, by pretending her betrayal didn't matter. It was a moral line I wasn't willing to cross, no matter how much others tried to push me. In the midst of the chaos and guilt, I found myself thinking about Emma constantly. Her laughter, her strength, her unwavering loyalty, everything about her seemed magnified in my memory. She had always been the kind of person who gave herself fully to the people she loved, even when it wasn't easy. During her illness, she never once complained about how unfair it all was. Instead, she focused on the things that mattered most to her kids, her friendships, and creating moments of joy despite the pain. I often wondered how she had the strength to stay so composed, even when she must have felt like everything was falling apart. What would Emma think of the choices I was making now? It was a question that haunted me. I wanted to believe she would understand why I couldn't babysit for Mike and his girlfriend, why I felt it was a betrayal of everything she stood for. But there was always a tiny voice of doubt, whispering that maybe she would have wanted me to put the kids first, no matter how hard it was. At the same time, I knew Emma valued integrity above all else. She had trusted me to carry forward the love and principles we had shared, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she wouldn't want me to compromise those values for the sake of convenience. The more I reflected on Emma, the more I realized that my love for her children wasn't in question. What was at stake was how I showed that love. Babysitting for Mike felt like erasing the pain and betrayal Emma endured. It felt like saying her struggles didn't matter. Honoring Emma's memory meant more than just loving her kids. It meant standing firm in the truths she couldn't always voice. And for me, that meant holding my ground, even when it hurt. Lily and Ben were at the center of everything, innocent bystanders in a situation far beyond their understanding. At just 6 and 9, they had already experienced more loss and upheaval than most adults. Their mother's absence loomed large, and while Mike tried to fill the gaps, there was no replacing Emma. Spending time with them, I could see how much they were struggling, even if they didn't always have the words to express it. Lily, ever observant, often asked questions that hinted at her deeper fears. "Do you think Mom is watching us? Is it okay if I forget her voice?" She was desperate to hold on to her mother's memory, clinging to photos, videos, and the stories we shared about Emma. Ben, on the other hand, expressed his grief differently. He would get frustrated more easily, sometimes lashing out or retreating into silence. But when he was comfortable, his childlike wonder would shine through. He'd talk about Emma as if she were still part of his daily life, recounting little things she used to say or do. It was heartbreaking and beautiful all at once. Watching their pain made me question my decisions constantly. Was I doing enough for them? Was my refusal to babysit hurting them in ways I couldn't see? They didn't deserve to feel abandoned, especially by someone they trusted. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the reality of what babysitting represented: complicity in a narrative that erased Emma's struggles and justified Mike's betrayal. What helped me find balance was understanding that I could support them without enabling Mike. I focused on spending quality time with them, taking them out for ice cream, helping Lily with her art projects, and building Lego sets with Ben. These moments reminded me that I could be a presence in their lives without compromising my boundaries. Lily and Ben were victims, but not just of their mother's death. They were caught in the wake of choices made by the adults around them. My role was to protect and love them, even if it meant making difficult choices. As much as I tried to focus solely on the kids, it became increasingly difficult to ignore the presence of Mike's girlfriend. She wasn't just a passive figure in the background. She was actively trying to integrate herself into their lives, positioning herself as a maternal figure. Every time I saw her, it felt like a surreal distortion of reality. She would show up at school functions, introducing herself to teachers and other parents with an air of familiarity that felt premature. Her social media posts, which I couldn't help but come across, often featured curated snapshots of her life with the children: smiling breakfasts, trips to the park, staged moments that seemed designed to project an image of effortless harmony. But behind the glossy facade, cracks were evident. Lily seemed wary of her, often watching her with a cautious expression, as if trying to figure out where she fit. Ben, on the other hand, was more easily swayed by her bubbly energy and the treats she brought. But even his enthusiasm felt tentative, like he was still navigating the loss of his mom. What struck me most was how quickly she had inserted herself into roles that had once belonged to Emma. It wasn't just about being a supportive presence. It felt like an attempt to overwrite Emma's memory, to rewrite the family's story with her at the center. This was what made Mike's request for babysitting even more infuriating. He wasn't just asking for help. He was asking me to validate this new dynamic, to participate in the illusion that everything was fine. It was yet another layer of betrayal, not just to Emma but to the kids, who deserved space to grieve and process without someone trying to replace their mother. For their sake, I tried to stay cordial, but every interaction left me feeling more resolute in my boundaries. I couldn't support a narrative that erased the truth of what had been lost. The new girlfriend's social media presence was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just that she was an influencer, it was the way she curated her life so meticulously, presenting a picture-perfect version of her relationship with Mike and the kids. Her posts featured everything from AI-generated art pieces to whimsical photos of her cats, and, more recently, snapshots of her life with Lily and Ben. Scrolling through her feed, I couldn't help but feel a mix of disbelief and anger. There they were, Emma's children, smiling in carefully posed pictures alongside captions like, "Family isn't about blood, It's about love. It was as if she were claiming a role she hadn't earned, wrapping herself in a narrative of unity and healing that erased the complexities of the situation. Her followers adored it. Comments flooded her posts, praising her for being a bonus mom and commending her for stepping up for the kids. It made me sick. They didn't know the truth, that she had been part of Mike's affair, that she had entered these children's lives through a betrayal of their mother. And while I didn't expect the internet to know the full story, seeing strangers applaud her felt like a mockery of Emma's memory. What bothered me most was how this public persona seemed to bleed into real life. At school events or community gatherings, people treated her as though she had always been a part of the family. The kids, meanwhile, seemed caught in the middle. Lily, who was old enough to understand the nuances, often looked uncomfortable when people referred to the girlfriend as a mother figure. Ben, younger and more impressionable, seemed to enjoy the attention but occasionally asked questions that revealed his confusion. I knew I couldn't control what she posted or how others perceived her, but it reinforced my decision to keep my boundaries firm. This wasn't just about helping Mike or the kids anymore. It was about refusing to validate a version of reality that disregarded the pain and betrayal that had brought us here. The internal conflict became almost unbearable. Every decision I made felt weighted, like it carried the potential to either honor or betray Emma's memory. I wanted to be there for Lily and Ben, but each interaction with Mike and his girlfriend only deepened my resentment. It wasn't just about their betrayal anymore. It was about the audacity of expecting me to seamlessly fold into this new narrative they were creating. There were nights when I lay awake, replaying conversations and questioning my actions. Was I being too rigid? Was my anger toward Mike clouding my judgment? I'd think about the kids, their innocent faces lighting up when I spent time with them, and I'd feel a pang of guilt. They didn't ask for any of this. They were caught in the middle, navigating a loss they could barely comprehend while the adults around them wrestled with their own failures and grudges. But then I'd think about Emma. I'd think about her strength, her dignity, and how she had quietly endured Mike's betrayal because she wanted to focus on her children. She had sacrificed so much to protect their innocence, to give them as much normalcy as possible in the midst of her battle. It was Emma's example that ultimately grounded me. She had always been clear about her values: love, loyalty, and integrity. She wouldn't have wanted me to compromise those values, even for the sake of her children. That thought gave me clarity, but it didn't make the decisions any easier. I began to realize that my struggle wasn't just about Mike or his girlfriend or even the kids. It was about me. It was about reconciling my love for Emma with the reality of the world she left behind, a world fractured by betrayal and loss. Each choice felt like a test of my character, and while I didn't always feel certain, I held on to one truth. I was doing my best to honor Emma in a way that felt authentic, even if it wasn't perfect. The reactions from the community were as varied as they were relentless. It seemed as though everyone had an opinion about my choices, whether they truly understood the situation or not. Some were supportive, quietly offering words of encouragement and reminding me that I had already done so much for Emma and her kids. Others were less kind, questioning my decisions outright or gossiping behind my back. The whispers followed me everywhere, at the grocery store, at community events, even during casual conversations with acquaintances. "Can you believe she's not helping more?" someone would murmur. "Those poor kids, they've already lost their mom." The worst were the insinuations that I was being spiteful, using the children as pawns to punish Mike. Friends who had been close to Emma often reached out, torn between their own feelings of loyalty to her and their perceptions of what I should be doing. Some encouraged me to forgive and focus on the kids, while others agreed that my boundaries were justified. "You've already sacrificed so much," one of Emma's childhood friends told me. "You don't owe Mike anything." But the pressure was constant, and it chipped away at me. I found myself retreating from social gatherings and avoiding situations where I might run into people who knew about the situation. The weight of their judgment felt suffocating, even when I knew my choices were rooted in love and integrity. What kept me grounded was the memory of Emma and the clarity of my own values. I reminded myself that I wasn't trying to win anyone's approval. My priority was honoring Emma's legacy and being there for her children in a way that felt right, not in the way the community thought I should. And while their voices were loud, I refused to let them drown out my own. The accusation that I had abandoned Emma's children weighed heavily on me, no matter how unfair or unfounded it seemed. Abandonment. It was such a loaded word, one that implied neglect, apathy, even cruelty. And yet, despite everything I had done for Lily and Ben, it was a word that kept surfacing in whispers from the community and arguments from Mike. I questioned myself constantly. Was I doing enough? Could I look back on my choices without regret? The guilt would creep in during quiet moments, especially when I thought about the children. I knew they missed their mother deeply, and I worried that my refusal to babysit might be interpreted as another loss in their young lives. But then, I'd remind myself of the reality. I hadn't abandoned Lily and Ben. I still made time for them, took them out for treats, and supported them emotionally when they needed it. What I had refused to do was participate in a situation that felt deeply wrong, one that asked me to set aside my principles and play a role that betrayed Emma's trust. I thought often about what abandonment truly meant. To me, it wasn't about declining to babysit or setting boundaries with Mike. It was about failing to show up when it mattered, about neglecting the children's emotional needs, or withdrawing my love entirely. I wasn't guilty of those things. My love for Lily and Ben remained unwavering, even if the way I expressed it didn't align with what others expected. Emma wouldn't have wanted me to sacrifice my integrity for appearances or to enable the people who had betrayed her. She had taught me to love fiercely, but also to stand firm in my beliefs. In that sense, I knew I hadn't abandoned her children. I was showing up in the only way I could, with honesty, love, and a deep respect for her memory. One of the most delicate challenges I faced was deciding how much to share with Lily and Ben. They were still so young, but they weren't oblivious. They knew something had changed, and their innocent questions often left me fumbling for the right words. "Why don't you come over more often?" Lily asked one evening, her tone cautious, as if she sensed the weight of the answer. I didn't want to lie to them, but I also didn't want to burden them with adult complexities they couldn't fully understand. "I'm always here for you," I told her, brushing her hair back as we sat together. "Even if I'm not always at your house, you can call me whenever you need." Ben, being younger, was less direct, but just as perceptive. He often asked if I was mad at Daddy, a question that hit me like a punch every time. "Nobody," I'd reply softly, though the words tasted bitter. "I just think it's important for everyone to figure things out in their own way." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough to satisfy his curiosity. For now, navigating these conversations required constant self-restraint. I wanted to shield them from the messiness of the situation, just as Emma had done. She had gone out of her way to ensure their lives felt normal, even when her own was anything but. I owed it to her to continue that effort, to give them stability and love without dragging them into the web of betrayal and resentment. At the same time, I knew I couldn't avoid these questions forever. As they grew older, they would begin to piece things together, and I wanted to be someone they could trust for honest, compassionate answers. For now, though, I focused on being present in the ways that mattered most, ensuring they felt supported and loved, even in the absence of their mother. Emma had set that example, and I was determined to follow it. Guilt became a constant companion during this time, lurking in the quiet moments and overwhelming me when I least expected it. It wasn't just the guilt of saying no to Mike or setting boundaries. It was the guilt of feeling like I could never do enough for Lily and Ben. I questioned everything. Was I wrong to refuse Mike's request? Did my decision make me selfish? Even though I knew my reasons were valid, the weight of those questions was crushing. Emma had trusted me with her children, and while I never promised to be their second parent, I felt a responsibility to honor her memory by being there for them. But where was the line between helping and losing myself in the process? The judgment from others only amplified these feelings. Every comment from a family member, every whispered criticism in the community, felt like another layer of guilt piling on. Are you really doing this for the kids? Or for yourself? One particularly harsh remark replayed in my mind. cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. But the most painful guilt came from within. I loved Lily and Ben, and there were moments when I wondered if my boundaries would hurt them in ways I couldn't see. They didn't understand the complexity of the situation. They only knew that I wasn't always there. Still, I tried to remind myself of the truth. Guilt didn't necessarily mean I was wrong. Emma had taught me to love fiercely, but also to respect my own limits. I wasn't abandoning her children. I was navigating a path that allowed me to care for them without compromising who I was. The guilt didn't disappear, but I learned to carry it with purpose. It became a reminder that love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up in the best way you can, even when the road is messy and uncertain. Emma's legacy was everywhere, in the faces of her children, in the memories we shared, and even in the values she instilled in those she loved. Losing her felt like losing a piece of myself, but as the months passed, I began to see how much of her still lived on. Her kindness, her resilience, and her unwavering love were threads woven into the fabric of our lives. Lily often reminded me of her mother. She had Emma's sharp wit and thoughtful nature, always observing before speaking. When she painted or drew, she'd say, "Mom loved when I did this," her small hands mimicking Emma's gentle strokes. Watching her create was like watching a part of Emma shine through, unbroken by the loss. Ben carried Emma's playfulness. He had her knack for finding joy in the smallest things, a funny cloud in the sky, a silly song he'd make up on the spot. Even in his grief, he brought light to the room, just as Emma always had. But Emma's legacy wasn't just in her children. It was in the lessons she left behind, the way she taught me to navigate life's challenges with grace. She had faced unimaginable betrayal and pain, yet she chose love over anger, dignity over bitterness. Her strength became a guide for me, a reminder of what mattered most. When I found myself doubting my choices, I would think about what Emma would have wanted. She valued integrity, honesty, and the kind of love that stood firm even in the hardest times. Honoring her didn't mean pretending everything was perfect. It meant being true to the values she held dear. Her absence was a wound that would never fully heal, but her presence lingered in the way we carried forward. Every moment spent with Lily and Ben, every decision made with her memory in mind, felt like a tribute to the incredible woman she had been. Emma's legacy wasn't just something we remembered, it was something we lived, every single day. As the dust began to settle, I found myself reflecting more deeply on what had happened, not just with Mike and the kids, but within myself. For months, I had been caught in an emotional tug-of-war, torn between loyalty to Emma, love for her children, and the need to protect my own boundaries. But now, I felt a growing clarity, a sense of resolution that had been absent in the chaos. The turning point came during a quiet moment with Lily and Ben. We had spent the afternoon at the park, and as we sat together on a bench watching the sunset, Lily leaned her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly. Ben chimed in with one of his goofy jokes, and they both laughed in a way that felt so natural, so unburdened. In that moment, I realized that my presence in their lives didn't have to conform to anyone else's expectations. It simply had to be real. I didn't need to be their second parent, nor did I need to accept every request Mike threw my way. What mattered was that Lily and Ben knew I loved them, that I was a steady presence they could rely on. That could mean taking them for ice cream, helping with a school project, or simply listening when they wanted to talk about Emma. I also came to terms with the boundaries I had set. They weren't a reflection of a lack of love. They were a necessary act of self-preservation. Enabling Mike's narrative or pretending his betrayal didn't matter, wouldn't have served the children or honored Emma's memory. In finding this balance, I felt a sense of peace. I wasn't perfect, and I didn't have all the answers, but I knew my choices were rooted in love and integrity. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. Looking back on everything, it's clear that this journey was as much about navigating grief as it was about finding my own strength. Losing Emma left a void that will never truly be filled. But in her absence, I've learned lessons I didn't expect about love, loyalty, and the importance of setting boundaries even in the most complicated situations. Emma's children, Lily and Ben, remain the brightest connection to her memory. They are her legacy, carrying her kindness, her humor, and her resilience into the world. Loving them has never been the question. The challenge has been figuring out how to do that in a way that stays true to who Emma was and who I am. Mike's betrayal and his subsequent choices created wounds that can't easily be mended. Forgiveness may come one day, but not at the expense of pretending his actions didn't matter. The boundaries I set were not about punishing him, but about honoring Emma and the values she held dear. I've come to understand that love doesn't require sacrificing your integrity, even for the sake of others. The reactions from the community, my family, and even from Mike himself were often harsh, but they forced me to confront what I truly believe in. Ultimately, I learned that doing the right thing isn't always about meeting expectations or pleasing others. It's about staying true to your heart, even when it's difficult. As I move forward, I hold on to the lessons Emma taught me. She showed me how to love deeply, live authentically, and face life's challenges with grace. Though she's gone, her spirit remains a guide, reminding me to lead with kindness, but also to stand firm in my convictions. In the end, life is messy, and the answers aren't always clear, but I've come to believe that what matters most is how we carry the love of those we've lost, and how we honor their memory by staying true to the people they inspired us to be. Emma's story, her strength, and her love will always be a part of mine, and for that, I am endlessly grateful.